This is AIM Agenda. Thanks for your company. With me now, Labor MP Ed Husic and Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both. Ed, I want to ask you first of all about national security, about the ASIO issue this week. Senator Brandis says he's received a briefing. He's been reassured that the agency's dealt with it, but he says the Prime Minister made a false claim in suggesting that the report this week of a breach at ASIO's headquarters was inaccurate. This is after he was briefed by ASIO last night.
No, well, he may well make that claim, but, you know, frankly, we're seeing that as a lot of political grandstanding. The media organisation reports that suggested that our building had been halted due to supposed security breaches, based on the information I've received, is just simply not true, and that they're not accurate at all in terms of the way that the issue's been reported. So I think people need to take pause, take breath, and think before some of these things get reported on. Because they do have serious implications.
It does seem, according to it has not been dealt with immediately by the government, but basically drip-fed by a bit of information we've seen through the Attorney General, then in the press, that ASIO, and then through Senator Brandis, that ASIO has dealt with this, and that potentially the claim has been overplayed. Obviously not great to have a cyber hit on our spy agency, but that they found out about it 3 years ago and dealt with it.
Well, look, the Labor Party has not been dealing appropriately with national security, and there's a bigger point here, Kieran. It's what Anthony Byrne said as the head of the Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security, when he said that his own government's cuts to funding were disgraceful and completely unacceptable. I mean, at a time when ASIO was facing, by its own words, increased domestic extremists in 2013, the government has been cutting funding to ASIO. Now, on the back of the more than 40,000 unauthorised arrivals, which have created security issues, on the back of cutting defence spending to the lowest level since 1938. We now have the revelation that they are cutting funding for ASIO
so what's
and
your
ONO.
claim in terms of the numbers? Because you're a former national security advisor to John Howard. You've worked in this area a fair bit. I want to know specifically what numbers are you claiming, and then we'll put it to Ed for his response.
Well, actually, in the submission from ASIO, which is on the website, to this parliamentary committee, they say that the funding was cut between 2010-11 to 2011-12 by 16.8 million. Then they go on to say, as a result of the budgetary constraints, they're going to have to reduce their presence overseas, they're going to have to reduce the training for their officers, they're going to have to travel less both domestically and internationally. This is what they've actually said, despite the increase in domestic extremism that they're facing.
So they're their own words. Is, Ed, that Anthony Byrne, the member for Holt, did say that this week. The head of that joint parliamentary committee on security and intelligence, he said exactly what Josh pointed out there, that it's disgraceful that the agencies have had their funding cut.
Kieran, my issue is you asked a specific question about whether or not claims in relation to the ASIO building were overblown. You put a specific question to Josh. Josh didn't answer the question, he deflected.
Well, we don't know.
No, hang on a second, let me finish. You deflected and you went off on your litany of other claims. You've been on this program before, Josh, and you've said, for example, that the defence funding cuts would cause all sorts of grief. When your side of politics was asked to determine whether or not it would reinstate that funding, you actually didn't. What you said is that you wouldn't reinstate the funding. So either be fair income with issues as important as this, or stop grandstanding. And that's my issue. Now, in terms of Anthony Byrne's comments coming, I started with, getting uptight about the fact that answers weren't being provided to direct questions. Anthony's the chairman of a committee. He's entitled to, on the basis of the information he gets as a chairman of a committee, putting it to the committee itself to put forward those things. I'm a strong believer in parliamentary committees putting forward this issue. If there are concerns that need to be followed up, follow them up. But I'm not going to have it on the basis of, the politicking that we usually have.
The Prime Minister yesterday in the Parliament pointed to the most recent budget. Sure. And says that in the last couple of budgets that funding has increased. The number that you pointed to there was 10-11.
11-12 based on 10-11 funding.
Okay, well, she says subsequently to that that funding has risen and significantly. Is that not true?
No, as ASIO says in this report, well, this is the most recent report we've got.
Well, no, the budget's the most recent report, and Julia Gillard says that it's gone up.
And actually, the funding in real terms has gone down in this budget. And the key point here is that there's 34,000 unauthorised arrival security assessments, which ASIO has had to defer or deflect some of their funding for.
So would you restore the funding?
We're absolutely committed to making ASIO better off than it is, right? And no, well, that's true. That's the truth. Because, you know, Ed goes off on his tangent to say, well, we're not going to increase defence spending. Well, hang on. In 1996, when John Howard came in and there was a $96 billion worth of a government debt that he had to repay, he cut spending right across the board, but he quarantined defence spending, and he kept it about 1.9 to 2% of GDP. Now, Ed, if you go around the world and you look at if you go around the world and you look at some of our countries in our region,
US.
in the UK they spend around 2%, in India about 2%, in Singapore 3.5%, in South Korea 2.5% of GDP on defence, and you raise the US 4.7%. Now, under your government, not under ours, under your government, you've actually decreased defence spending to the lowest levels
on ASIO security. You say that funding for ASIO will go up under the coalition government.
We're absolutely committed to appropriately fund ASIO. And what ASIO is saying now is that the funding is not appropriate. That's what they've said. They've said actually the Taylor Review that came out in 2005 and recommended that they needed to increase the number of personnel to 1,860. They cannot meet that now.
You don't need to speak. Just bring a whole bunch of Play-Doh and just squeeze that around a bit and that'll get the answer you want.
I want to ask you
No, wait up. Hang on a second. Kieran, come on. He's just spoken for, 5 years just then. he talked about he talked about military spends in other countries. In the UK, they're cutting. In the US, they're cutting.
Still way above us.
Why? Of course they're way above us. Look at their military commitments. The fact of the matter is, as circumstances change, very good point, thank you for raising that, in terms of Afghanistan, as we draw down, as the type of commitments required on the world stage contract, it is right, it is responsible to review defence spending and make it accordingly. If circumstances change, then we obviously should spend more.
I want to talk specifically about, it's difficult when this case is before the court, but a young a Muslim man in Sydney alleged to have made a threat against a member of the Joint Counter-Terrorism Task Force. What's your reaction to this? I suppose, given the events that we've seen in the last few weeks.
Before the courts, we obviously can't say too much, but there should be zero tolerance for this. And let's stop blaming ourselves for some of the problems with extremism in the community. Let's stop blaming our involvement in Afghanistan. We went there because it was the HQ for world terrorism and Al-Qaeda. Let's stop blaming ourselves because we went to Iraq. Well, Saddam Hussein used gas against his own people and killed thousands and hundreds of thousands of his own people. Let's stop blaming ourselves for them not accepting our values. That's my point. Right, we've got to have zero tolerance as a nation.
We have had the Muslim leadership, a lot of, I've seen in the UK as well. Do we need more of the Muslim leadership in Australia, Ed, coming out and speaking forcefully on these matters to repudiate extremism?
And I've certainly been in the case that for years I've spoken out against that, and I'm genuinely concerned about elements that do embrace extremism, and you'll get that, in various forms. I think anything we can. There needs to be a carrot and stick approach. One is obviously, finding ways of being able to, get people to move away from extremism, but there is also a need for us to target people that we believe are lending themselves to extremist thought and dealing with them. And I agree with Josh, you can't talk about the individual circumstances, but there can be no quarter given in the fight on extremism.
Okay, let's talk about one final. We've got a bit of time, so we might get through a few more issues. Yeah, just quickly if you can.
On this issue of national security, the Prime Minister announced a strategy earlier this year, right? Big fanfare, national security strategy.
You're going to politicise it?
No, I'm not. I'm actually going to point out something that was very wrong in what the Prime Minister said. And that is that she said that the 9/11 decade was over and that the greatest threat to Australia was going to come from state actors, not from non-state actors. Now, since then, we've had Boston. Since then, we've had London, and we've had ASIO in written documentation talk about domestic extremists in 2013. My real deep concern My real deep concern is that we're not properly examining these threats and equipping, resourcing the people who can deal with it, namely ASIO, the AFP and others.
But hang on, just, you know where there's an issue?
That's what I'm
I
saying.
don't dispute you. I mean, you heard my words a few moments ago, no quarter given on extremism. And these things need to be followed through. But, you know, we have other big issues in terms of, for example, Iran and Syria that we've previously spoken on. 1.5 million displaced in Syria. We have sectarian violence within Iraq that's flaming up again. I mean, these things are catalysts for broader issues as well, and they're not easy for us to sort out. I mean, what do we do on Syria? You know, we have a world that doesn't have an appetite to get re-involved in that type of issue. But what do we do when Russia and the US cannot find agreement on how to stop the Assad regime doing what it's doing to its own people?
Very, very slowly. There's a peace summit next month on this. And in the meantime, tens of thousands get slaughtered.
And up to 200 Australians, the head of ASIO, David Irvine, has publicly said up to 200 Australians have gone to fight in Syria.
And this is my issue, Josh.
And Ed, I congratulate you because you're speaking up against this, and we need to work together on this across the political aisle to isolate the extremists, to say that's not acceptable in Australia, to use the law and our intelligence agencies and our federal police.
All right, I just finally want to, we've only got a couple of minutes left, quickly get your thoughts on this debate. Internally within Labor, it caused quite a stink yesterday. John Faulkner said he was ashamed of the party for supporting this additional funding for political parties. This is going to be introduced today. Both sides of politics are going to back it. It won't go down that well in the electorate. Ed?
Look, the decision's been made by both political parties. I'm tired of us talking about ourselves and not getting on with the job of actually focusing on issues that need to be focused on. And the laws will be debated on the floor, and we'll just go from there. People can look at my record on various issues and determine what my views are. But I just think let's move on.
Overwhelming endorsement of the changes there.
Obviously, it costs a lot of money to run campaigns and to bring democracy to Australia, and so therefore this is a deal that's been organised between higher powers than us, and we'll go along with it.
Well, thanks for. It's always good to see. I know that you two aren't the highest powers, but I know that our viewers enjoy your discussion.
Angry, but I like the fact. I'm a bit sorry about the lounges. It was paying out like a faulty ATM last time we sat there. I was getting money out of it. It's the first time I shouted
post budget. That was it.
Oh, the post budget on the lounges. I got you.
Yeah.
Well, be careful what you find in the back of the lounges. But so it funded your coffees at least.
No, just coins, no knives. Oh, is that the wrong thing? Okay.
Thank you both this morning. Appreciate it. That's all for AM Agenda. The latest news is next.